Can you dispel some of the myths about Chinese law and law generally in the West?
Chinese law is actually based on German law and a bit of Japanese law, so actually it's not too different to how people in continental Europe see the law.
Alex Roberts, commercial, technology and data partner, global co-leader of gaming sector, partner of Linklaters law firm.
Do you think it's a bit too late with AI laws? Do you think we've already opened up Pandora's box?
I wouldn't say it's...
The GDPR, that is a big topic. It's pretty stringent in the UK, but does it apply to China? And does China generally enforce it? Here we go.
How much have you got? Shall I start my clock?
Could you see a situation where a barrister or a lawyer is standing up in court and then they're up against a AI lawyer?
There's already tests and trials of that sort of thing in various markets.
This idea that as a creative, that someone can take anything that I've made and then just AI it is scary.
It is scary, particularly if it's my head. But
you're right about the nuances, because you could do something that sounds like my voice, isn't my voice. I've seen recently they had Michael Jackson and The Weeknd remixed together, but they made it so it sounded like them, but it wasn't exactly like them. Congratulations, Panda Profits gang, we've made some progress. 81% of people that watch the podcast are not subscribed, down from 83%. Our goal is 75%. If you like this channel, please subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. The bigger the channel, the bigger the guests. Thank you, enjoy the episode. Alex, being a lawyer in China, how do you navigate this?
With great difficulty. No, I guess I get this question a lot, and I guess it always has a little bit of backstory or background in the current world we live in, right? There's the law, then there's the geopolitics, the politics, and all of this comes into what I do as a lawyer. I guess technically speaking, though, if you look at my business card, it's a little less sexy at the moment. It just says Chief Representative of an international law firm. Right. Doesn't necessarily go down as well, but
sounds cool.
Well, maybe to you, maybe less to my wife, but I got there in the end of that. I got there in the end. But I guess what I do is more, and maybe that's why I want a business podcast with you, is facilitate business. I connect PRC qualified lawyers here in China with our overseas lawyers, and then obviously the clients on both sides. But technically speaking, I don't practice or advise on PRC law at the moment. It's more about business. So reading the papers, listening to great podcasts like this one, and just getting the context and then packaging up the law within that is kind of what I do. So a lawyer by training, but day to day, a business facilitator, I guess.
Right, so connector of lawyers would be the... So how much legal practice are you actually doing day to day? Are you doing still advisories and...
It's still very much advisory and working with big multinationals, Novartis, from different sectors, and also the local champions. Most of the work I do on a day-to-day tends to be tech and data related, which is obviously quite fun at the moment with AI. I have to stand in front or stand behind on the shoulders of PRC lawyers that we have here, because I can't practice, but all of the stuff that we're discussing is legal and regulatory and how that impacts the business environment.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the myths, I guess. Can you dispel some of the myths about Chinese law and law generally in the West?
There are many, many myths. Without getting too technical, what people I don't think understand is, so Chinese law, the civil code, what we use on a day-to-day basis, the sort of base is actually based on German law and a bit of Japanese law. So actually it's not too different to how people in continental Europe at least see the law. But obviously China has become a business hub, right, for every trade in and out, both directions. And therefore I'd say that the law here has evolved very quickly to match the fact that China is a very connected market. So actually a lot of the tech and data rules, although they have a reputation, at least in the Western press, for being very strict, are actually based on Western precedents. And a lot of the work that I do is actually mapping and helping clients to understand what is the same, what is different to what they're used to in their home markets, whether it's the US, Europe, Southeast Asia. So that convergence, I think we see quite a lot.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. It's me. Alongside hosting this podcast, I run a few businesses focused on driving business growth, both digitally and offline in China. First, I'm an influencer with over 300,000 fans in China and in the West, helping companies and organizations boost brand awareness through engaging short-form content. Second, I partner with a digital marketing agency in China to help companies in any industry set up, create content, manage inquiries, and grow their social media presence on the Chinese platforms, such as Chinese websites, WeChat, Red, Douyin, and more. If you're looking to expand in China, reach out today. Now, back to the podcast.
So what specifically would you say, when it comes to, say, German law with Chinese law, is it just generally the legal principles, or does...
The legal, it's not what I do so much on a day-to-day basis as a sort of tech and data lawyer, but those general principles in terms of how the court hierarchy and things are set. Hopefully, as a business person, elements you never get to see because you don't have disputes that go to court. But that general basis is there. But now, I guess everyone has heard of the GDPR as this European monolith of data protection regulation. Actually, the Chinese rules that came in 2021 are actually 80% similar to that. So you can see China has learned, and then, as the Chinese authorities say, given it Chinese characteristics to nuances for the local market. But there's a lot of similarities in terms of the principles around consent and what the impact that has on click boxes on websites. If I want to download your podcast here in China or in Europe, there's probably some sort of consent mechanism acknowledging that I'm signed up and giving data away. So there's a lot of similarities, which again helps me as an international lawyer to understand both markets, because what I learned in the UK to an extent is applicable here.
So that actually leads me quite nicely into GDPR, because that is a big topic.
Yeah.
It's pretty stringent, right, you'd say, in the UK, but does it apply to China, and does China generally enforce it? Here we go.
How much have you got? Shall I start my clock? So it applies if you're providing services or goods into Europe and processing data of European residents to do that. So if you're an e-commerce player here and you want to provide goods into Germany and you need the name and the address of the person you're sending it to, arguably it applies. And it's actually the way that Chinese law now works. So if you're a foreign company, and I advise companies on this all the time, providing goods and services into the Chinese market, then Chinese law has extraterritorial effect, which means that if they are sucking in the names and the addresses of Chinese citizens, then the law technically applies. So yeah, there's similarities there. A lot of the work that we do is because China hasn't necessarily gone down the path of lots of implementation rules and guidance like what you have in the UK and you have in Europe, which actually businesses like to have that additional detail. You don't necessarily have to pay expensive lawyers to download it. It's actually written out pretty clearly, but it helps businesses to understand the nitty-gritty of actually working in the environment, and China doesn't have that yet. So actually quite a lot of the work that I do is looking at what Europe and the UK did when they had similar laws like the GDPR, and say how the Chinese law might apply in the same way, because we know the Chinese authorities, because in the notes that they wrote when they wrote the law, were referring back to the European laws as they were.
So how do you balance that idea of they may be not as strict as GDPR, but also there's this idea of over-regulation? If you were to do a compare and contrast of, say, Chinese law versus Western law, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a good one. And again, there's those layers of geopolitics, politics, the law that comes in. I guess if we take, a lot of people are looking at the AI laws at the moment, obviously something that sort of impacts what you're doing in terms of disseminating the sort of material that you're looking at and has a reference. But a lot of people are saying about the EU Act that it is, sets a very, very high bar and too high for business. Chinese businesses will never go and invest in Europe anymore. American businesses won't, because actually the bar is set too high if you want to be producing AI products, selling AI services, related services into Europe. But actually the flip side of looking at it is because it now has one law that applies across the whole of the trade bloc, all 27 member states, right? At least there's a consistency across the whole of Europe, and the member states, the local governments, cannot come out with their own AI laws. You have a sort of baseline. So it's a strict one, but at least you have a baseline. China, on the other hand, is a huge market trade block in itself, and it has a baseline. But what China is now doing is trying to work out if it goes beyond the EU law or sets itself slightly below. We do have rules that are pretty strict for generative AI, so ChatGPT, all of these products that we love to use on a day-to-day basis. But we don't have an all-singing or dancing AI law yet. It might be coming out this year, I'm told. I don't know if you've heard any secrets, but the legislators at least said probably this year. And we'll see if that actually sets a nationwide, any AI product related law that is, like I said, stricter or not. I think it will be similar to the EU law, to be honest. But whether they apply to business in a stricter or less rigorous way is often down to the day-to-day implementation. And because China tends not to have so many guidelines, rules around the edges, as I said, the UK and Europe does.
Well, I know laws take a long time to generally get through, particularly UK. Obviously, you've got gets talked about in the Commons and has to go for House of Lords and get royal assent, all this kind of stuff. But do you think it's a bit too late with AI laws? Do you think we've already opened up Pandora's box and...
Yeah. Well, interested to hear what you think. From you're using these tools as well as I am. Part of the reason that I like this job is actually, particularly when you're a tech and data lawyer, you're playing with your phone, you're playing with online platforms every day, and it kind of has an impact on what you're doing. I wouldn't say it's... Well, the regulators are always trying to work out whether to regulate quickly when a new technology comes out, and China is known for doing that. And China is thinking again how to legislate in this space. And a lot of those rules are based around AI technologies plugging into games, analyzing gamers' data, hopefully improving the gaming experience, but at what cost if they're taking extra data that maybe you don't want your kids giving into gaming developers. There's rules that definitely work, but some rules need to evolve along with the technology. So whether you have technology-specific rules or have a broad brush principle-based set of rules, which is usually their approach in Europe, the regulators here are still trying to find what the happy medium is. But I don't know, in terms of what you see and what you're doing, do you think there's too much of a heavy hand in terms of rules and data, and you having to sign documents to consent to data being given away?
I do, but I think most people don't care.
Yeah,
if you see an Apple consent
yeah.
form, everyone's going to have to click yes in order to get the updates.
The product, right?
But I do actually agree with and I'd be interested to hear your views on that, how the government in China has been strict with young people using social media. How stringent has that actually been? Has it actually had a positive effect? Where if someone's swiping away on Douyin, TikTok, then it says, right, we're going to cut this off in an hour. How effective has that been? Because surely you could just have another phone and then go onto Douyin on another platform.
You've obviously learned the tricks yourself.
Yeah, I've learned the tricks. So, and obviously, it's a bit of a chicken and egg for me because I do social media, so I want people to stay on for as long as possible, particularly this podcast, to watch as long as possible. But at the same time, you've also got to have a bit of a break and play outside as a kid, especially.
I mean, and that social side of lawmaking is something that I think is kind of lost on people in the West, that China is actually pushing a lot of those, whether you want to call it ESG, social impact, but driven legislation. You see that coming through a lot. So the algorithm regulations that came out a couple of years ago before these all singing or dancing generative AI rules actually have a couple of provisions that are specifically aimed at protecting young users of algorithms. So you mentioned Douyin before, obviously has an algorithm there that directs you to certain video content. Hopefully this podcast.
Yes.
But also legislation or rules, provisions that specifically protect the elderly as well, because traditionally they can't use tech as much and are very, very vulnerable. So I think that's really interesting that China is actually specifically going down that path. But that's not that what's picked up a lot in the Western media. I'd say there's more horror stories about national security and blocks on data going overseas, whereas this stuff that is focused on society and making sure the communities are stable doesn't unfortunately get the elevation I would say that it should. But we definitely see those ESG principles coming up in all markets around APAC now. There's lots of child protection rules in Singapore, Indonesia, etc. that are, I wouldn't say being learning from China in China, just China, but China is definitely one of the first markets, big markets, I would say, to bring out those laws in such a big way as it did. So I think it's quite an interesting point of reference.
But how effective have they actually been?
Yeah, well, to go back to there's plenty of anecdotes of kids having, if you register as a 5-year-old or whatever, you can't use these games and apps after a certain hour, or you're limited to a certain number of a certain time of day. But then you just get grandma's face and you run over and get her to scan her identity, and it logs you back in. So you definitely, it's hard to police in practice, but I think taking the step of having the rules in the first place is a good one. It's then how do you implement and enforce where you need business to come along. And I think China is getting much better at, and part of my role of the British Chamber is to interact with governments on both sides, but to make sure business has a voice in that rule-making process. And I think China has really learned it needs to do that more. When I came in 2012, having consultation papers that are sent out for a month or whatever for business industry to comment on was just not a thing. But I think, for instance, the free trade zone here in Shanghai was a bit of a catalyst, at least for the local government, really understanding if they wanted to develop that into a premium financial economic zone, they needed to get business input. So Linklaters, for instance, as a UK firm, we spoke to and coordinated some comments from the City of London, which is obviously a huge traditional hub of global finance, helping the Chinese government to understand how that works and what they could take on a sort of compare and contrast basis. Not all of it is taken, of course, it's a different market, different scale, but at least showed that the Chinese authorities, the Shanghai authorities, were really trying to learn from other precedents, which I think is quite interesting way to look at things.
Yeah, I liken it to when I was a kid and I was 14, 15, my parents would come into my room and say, look, turn the TV off.
Yeah.
That you'd have that hour before you went to bed, and then they went off to bed, and then I just turned it on again. Turn the volume down a little bit. I think kids, unfortunately, will always find a way, and getting them to go outside and be with their peers, and they've got all these phones in their watches now, so that's the issue. But I think that you can clearly see they're trying to do more than the UK government. I don't know the UK government trying to curb social media usage.
Yeah.
I think there's more vested interest in that, probably. But the government here, I don't see it as a control thing. I see it as they're genuinely wanting the youth to focus less on social media and more on education or being out with their friends. So it's a positive step. But you're right. It's the enforcement side. How do you get the Daniel, turn the TV off. You turn the TV off, and then a few hours later, I just put it back on again. It's the same with a phone. A kid is always going to find a way with grandma.
We need having the laws is one thing, right? But having the buy-in from whether it's the business community or the community at large, you also need that. So you need the parents to think, actually, that law works for this reason. So this should usually be an education piece, whether it's from the government as lawmakers or lawyers, and explaining why it's like this and why it's beneficial. That piece is also crucial.
So how do you see AI transforming the legal industry specifically, especially in China?
A lot, surprisingly. I mean, lawyers traditionally have been quite slow to move. But I think we're realizing we have to adapt quickly because, AI is so pervasive, right? It just goes across businesses, and the legal profession also cannot hide. You can already see it coming in terms of the more routine types of work that we do as lawyers, whether it's research, summarizing documents, maybe doing analytics on sort of standard contracts. AI can already do that pretty well. We've been using it within Linklaters, and the wider legal community has been using that for a number of years. It's been turbocharged with generative AI, and just the way that you can understand and interact with. We call our ChatGPT Enterprise, our internal version, Layla, and it just has a bit more of a personality. I've tried to get out of saying please and thank you to Layla. Supposedly that doesn't help the prompts as much.
Or going Layla, like singing the song as well, right?
Yeah, you don't have to be polite to it, I'm told, but I can't get out of the habit. But yeah, we use it all the time. I walk around the office and see the juniors using it, and it brings a smile to their face to see how they are quickly adapting. But I think there's a mindset thing there as well. I think tech lawyers, and maybe I'm just giving myself a bit of a pat on the back, but I think because we've been looking at these technologies for a long time, have already realized that we cannot just be lawyers to actually understand and apply these laws to the best we can for clients, wherever we're speaking to, the stakeholders. You need to understand the technology, but be able to just put technology and law together, because they're both evolving so quickly. So unless you have that fundamental understanding to start with, you're never going to be able to advise very well or communicate that advice.
So is it taking the job away from the clerks that are deciphering all that information that they would usually do for a barrister or a lawyer, to go through a case and pick out the key parts and here you go, this is what you need to present? Or is it doing that job? Because a lot of lawyers are saying that this is going to take our jobs away, because we do that work essentially ourselves. So is it, are you seeing that kind of trend? Or?
It's inevitable. It's inevitable. Right. I mean, we had our Asia Partners meeting go in Hong Kong, and one of the sort of parting messages from the big boss man was, go back to your teams, to your offices, and work out how you train your juniors in an AI environment, because they won't be able to do in a few months, a few years, they won't be doing that work that you've just described. But they need to learn how to be a lawyer, right? And you learn by doing in a professional service environment. So how do you teach them to do things? It's great having AI, but you need to understand what it can do, what the outputs are, if you're then going to manage it. And I think a lawyer will become more of a manager, a project manager, a people manager, and also a tech manager as we go forward, which for me, as I said, a lot of the reason I got into this job was the people interaction, so I'm fine. Yeah. I'm old. I'm not going to lose my job for a bit, fingers crossed. Yeah. But definitely for that junior end, it's going to be tricky over the next few years.
Could you see a situation where a barrister or a lawyer is standing up in court and then they're up against a AI lawyer or barrister as well, or two AI barristers and lawyers? And because I guess the AI would have to be self-aware that it is in a courtroom and defending or prosecuting a case. So could you see a situation like that? Or two AI lawyers up against each other? Or
that's a good
or an AI judge? Like, could you see that kind of situation happen?
There's already tests and trials of that sort of thing in various markets. Not in China yet. I think the US has a few examples where people have basically taken the AI robot and sat it and got them to run the case rather than the lawyer. I think AI is getting closer, but that context piece, understanding, like you say, whether you're defending, whether you're the one on doing the prosecuting, the AI struggles to get the nuance that goes with all of those different variables. So I think there'll always be a role for lawyers. Obviously, the hallucination bit that we hear about all the time, right, is definitely there too. There's plenty of fun cases out there. There's some great New York examples, for instance, where the lawyers have gone in with what look like great materials, but in all the cases that they've cited are all made up by the AI. So you have to be careful. Again, learning what the limitations are of the technology is so important as well for lawyers. So you need to have a way of learning that and finding that path. And the way to do it easily and efficiently without having people in the office all hours of the day is the tricky thing, the challenge that I guess I have over the next couple of years.
I find this with the US legal system in particular, is the lawyers there, it is a personality, it's a show, sometimes you're playing to the jury. So how that would work with AI, I think, would be a difficult one. You said about the nuances, that's definitely a thing. It is a lot of body language, isn't it? It's the way you present yourself, and you're playing a role, it's theatrical as well. So that would be another part that AI I don't think could quite function.
Well, this is why you have a way back into the law from your social media role now. You can be the project manager of an AI tool, and you can add that personalized aspect.
I disagree. I don't think I would have been a good lawyer, because I don't live and breathe the law like you do. I think to be a good industry person in any industry, you have to live and breathe and love it, and you clearly do. I never had that when I studied law. I would sit down in a law lecture and they'd talk about Lord Denning and my brain would switch off. I was more interested in business in China, whereas my contemporaries in class would be, oh, what did this judge say about this case? And I think that's what to be a good lawyer, you have to really love it, I think, and be really passionate about it. And it's helped me later on in life with, we were saying about the mooting, standing up in front of people, and contract law has been quite a good one. But the stuff I learned many years ago now, 15 years ago, it's all out of date, probably, a lot of stuff. So I think being a good lawyer is also really keeping up with day to day what's happening around the world, and having commercial awareness as well. I think that was always a big thing they hammered into us at university.
Well, I think that academic side will be taken a bit by the bot, whatever we call it, whether it's Layla or something else. And I think there'll be more emphasis, to be honest, on the side of the profession, which is the bit that you're bringing, emphasising on that personal, the personal touch. I think is really important.
So what do you see as the most pressing legal implications of AI right now, particularly with voice and likeness? Could someone just create a Panda Profits podcast AI version, put it out there with our deep fake
could
faces?
Never be duplicated. Never be duplicated. It's a one-off, unique product. I mean, there's cases going through the Chinese courts at the moment on this exact subject, right? Around, is your voice personal to you? Does it have IP protection? Can people just rip it off, put it in an AI tool, whatever we want to call it, and then produce their own products using your voice? The courts, for now, have said no. But this is changing in China. The rules around this sort of issue are changing here very quickly, the UK very quickly, the US very quickly. We're working on things in the US around these issues as well. I think the pressing issue for businesses, whether big or small, is just, I think I mentioned it a bit before, just trying to get some consistency. Because whenever I speak to businesses, particularly when they're in different markets or working with different people in different parts of the world, where you have different rules in different markets, it's really is a drag on business, just in terms of cost and time to understand how you comply. So everyone just really, but at least from a business perspective, wants a bit more harmonization. I was speaking about the EU right before, that you have 27 countries now that have signed up to having the same law across a whole continent. Can we do the same in APAC, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand? Can we have some commonality with AI? Because it's so pervasive across organizations, across society. It knows no borders like data. So I think that getting that G to G, government to government engagement, business to business engagement across markets is going to be really important.
So I can't IP my voice or likeness right now. And particularly in the US, this is why you had all the strikes and everything, particularly in the movie industry, because they said,
Hollywood,
well,
right?
technically they can just use your voice or likeness forever, which they have always done with Gene Kelly singing in the rain and all this. They used to use them for adverts. The old VW advert was Singing in the Rain, and they took his head and then just took a dancer's body and put them together. So it's always been there, but this idea that as a creative, that someone can take anything that I've made and then just AI it is scary.
It is scary. Particularly if it's my head. But
no, you're a very handsome man.
And I mean, the court case I've been made, the recent court case here in China, that specifically looks at this issue, and a voice now has protection. Whether that China doesn't have the precedent sort of system that we see in the UK or China, so that could change. But at least we have that case now from a creator's perspective to look to, and AI developers, the guys that are making these tools, now need to be wary of that. But yeah, you see in what businesses are asking for a lot more in terms of developing tools, or at least AI developers, is more freedom to use all of the internet's great wealth of materials and content to build these models without that being restricted by law. And China, the US and the UK are trying to find out where the right line is to give creators the protection they should have, because they put a lot of time into making the material, right, like yourself, versus allowing these tools, AI tools, to develop in a way that's actually beneficial to us all too. And I don't think we've quite come out with the right position yet, but watch this space.
And you're right about the nuances, because you could do something that sounds like my voice, but isn't my voice. I've seen recently they had a Michael Jackson and The Weeknd, like a remix together, but they made it so it sounded like them, but it wasn't exactly like them. So there's obviously nuances in the law there.
Can you send me a link to that?
Yeah, I will. It's quite a good, it's like The Weeknd's singing Billie Jean, or but it sounds like it, but it isn't exactly like it, or it's Michael Jackson singing like "Save Your Tears," right? So The Weeknd songs, and they mix them together, and it's really clever. And I know David Guetta did a song recently. He did it with Eminem, wasn't it? He said it made
some cases on this.
So that's really interesting. But the nuances, I guess, that's for the lawyers to work out, isn't it? Well, where's the fine lines there?
Yeah.
So let's go into your origin story. Really interesting. From architecture graduate from Cambridge to top lawyer at Linklaters in China. So what was it like studying at Cambridge, and what was that journey like?
Yeah, so I guess when I was younger, and maybe it's still true now, I was a little bit indecisive in terms of making decisions about what I wanted to do in life. So actually doing architecture was actually just what I loved doing at school, which was just about everything. So a bit of art, a bit of science, maths, a bit of the physics courses, and actually doing architecture in the UK at that time, particularly in Cambridge, it was an art subject. So actually it had a bit of everything in there. So a bit different to the law. I guess I quickly realised that I was not actually very good at it. Now I think back at it, the sniggers from my classmates when I came up with projects that were made out of precious minerals, but to house a busker opposite the local cafe that I liked didn't quite sit well. But I learned some skills, transferable skills, which I then took into an architect's office for a year to try it out, working with the senior lawyers the senior architects, which is now similar to senior lawyers that I work with, and that sort of office hierarchy, project management, and all of this stuff. I guess the Cambridge course in particular was really short. It was only 8 weeks, so pretty pressured in terms of delivering, and again, just making sure you knew who to speak to get help as much as what you know, and that's really what I do, as we said before, that sort of connection.
And going to Cambridge, what do you think it gave you personally? What differentiates going there compared to just like a Russell Group university?
Obviously, as a place, is steeped in history and has a lot of tradition in itself, and I guess the way that the people see the law, it's at least in the UK, and actually a lot of the work that I do here as part of the British Chamber, which is something I do on the side, is connecting lawyers here back to the British legal community, because it does have this long tradition, and Cambridge is part of that, that academic side. But it's less of what I do on a day-to-day now at Linklaters, I would say. But understanding that and coming from that has obviously given me a good basis, I would say, and just understanding how the legal system works, even if I now apply it in a tech and data, AI-powered way.
So do you think it gave you a good foundation, actually, although it's completely left field? It's the same thing with me. I studied law at university, and now I do social media, so I've gone the other way.
Yeah.
Do you think it actually gave you great skills and a foundation in order to be a great lawyer?
Yeah, well, I would never say I'm a great lawyer. I'd leave it to others to comment on that. But definitely the skill set, and like you just said, that sort of, I think we were discussing before we turned on the mic, right? That oratory part, doing the muting and presenting yourself, is something that's lent itself to what you do now on a day-to-day basis. But also when I have to communicate the advice that I'm working on with the lawyers in the team to clients and be succinct, try and translate literally sometimes from one language to another. Again, those skill sets that you learn in an environment like Cambridge apply themselves across the other side of the world now to China.
So what was the roadmap back then? You graduated, and then how did you then get into law and become a lawyer in China?
It's a long, windy path. So I after graduating from the bachelor degree in Cambridge, I applied to some London firms, originally from London, but then moved out to Suffolk, so in the middle of nowhere, the countryside, where my folks still live, which is lovely to go back to from Shanghai. just for a bit of quiet for maybe a week, and then I get bored very quickly. But
I'm the same.
yeah, but then it also applied to a couple of local firms where my folks live, and actually ended up working in a local architecture firm for about a year, designing residential projects. So actually much more small scale than I imagined, but actually that connected, I guess, with that personal aspect of architecture, which I really liked, and actually taught me, I think, that the people side of the business rather than the drawing side was what I really liked. And also at the time, lots of international law firms were paying for people to go and retrain and do conversion courses in the UK. So if someone is paying for you to go back and have fun at university, that also ticks some boxes for me. So I went and did a conversion course, and then the legal practice course, so 2 years more at studying, and then went in to be a trainee lawyer in London at Baker McKenzie, another big international firm.
And then the firm, what, they eventually send you out here, or is that?
Yeah, so I mean, they, same to Linklaters, they have offices all across the globe. China was obviously rising as an economy at that time, in the early noughties. So they were just doing a lot more work supporting China businesses coming to the UK, to Europe, to the US, and also the flow in the other direction. So I was just naturally getting exposure to that. When I'd done my architecture course, I'd actually learnt some Japanese, and then started doing some Chinese evening classes, when the Japanese language course clashed with my bar job in Nottingham. Anyway, but just kept it up. Learned enough Chinese to convince people to then send me out as a trainee to the Beijing office for part of my traineeship, just before the Olympics. So it was a fun time to come out. And then just run with the China thing. Even when I went back to the UK, I was there for another 5 years before I relocated out to Shanghai in 2012.
Alex, where can people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is always a good place. So if you just search for my name, I will be there. I think my mobile number might actually be on there. If you can manage to get through the restrictions to connect with me, you can get all my details, and then you can get my WeChat, where I put out a lot of posts as well. But LinkedIn is probably the easiest.
And when it comes to speeches, panelists, you are the master. You're one of those guys you've got to have on a panel when you do an event.
I'm always available, as long as there's coffee involved.
Yeah.
I need coffee in my good Panda Profits mug.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Alex. I've learned a lot as a former lawyer, quote unquote, legal student.
It's not too late.
It's not too late. I can still do that conversion.
100%.
I've got a 10-year kind of lease on the law firm. I think it's expired now, but I'd have to go back and
come and see me later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
And guys, if I missed any questions, feel free to drop a comment below, like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.